We are as clouds that veil the midnight moon, how restlessly they speed and gleam and quiver, streaking the darkness radiantly, yet soon night closes round and they are lost forever. Or like forgotten lyres whose dissonant strings give various response to each varying blast, to whose frail frame no second motion brings, one mood or modulation like the last. We rest, a dream has power to poison sleep. We rise, one wandering thoughts pollute the day. We feel, conceive, or reason, laugh, or weep, embrace fond woe, or cast our cares away. It is the same, for it be joy or sorrow. The path of its departure still is free. Man's yesterday may never be like his morrow, not may endure, but mutability. This is one of my favorite poems from Percy Bysshe Shelley, one of the leading romantic poets of the 18th century. And in this poetry, you can see that he describes the impermanence of life from our internal experience to the external reality of form. It is a constantly fluctuating, changing reality that we cannot deny. Nothing endures but mutability. Mutability is change. So the Buddha is not alone in his observation of impermanence as a reality, as one of the mark of existence. For anyone who has a little bit of self-reflection, done a little bit of reflection about life, observation about life and nature, will come to the same conclusion, which obviously Shelley did when he wrote his poem. There isn't anything that is constant in our life at all except change. When we look at the external, everything externally seems like something seems like it doesn't change, but you give it a little bit of time, it all does. Empires rise and fall. Monuments are built and shifting and changing and mutable. And internally, in our experience, we have the five aggregates, which the Buddha talks in ad nauseum about how it changes. What are those five aggregates? We read every time we sit and get together from the Great Wisdom Heart Sutra. Those five aggregates are form, feeling, thoughts, volitions, and personal consciousness. So, internally, these five aggregates are constantly changing. The problem is that suffering has its root, one of its roots, in us not acknowledging and willing to accept this change. We want things that are positive. So when positive things come, we enjoy them, we're happy with them, and we want these positive experiences to last forever. When they change, which they all inevitably will, and other experience arises, we go seeking for other positive experiences. So we can keep reiterating this seeking, this forever chasing for the reward of feeling good, which we all know is fruitless because you're going to chase it forever. The experience of your dopamine rush doesn't last very long. It makes you feel pleasurable sensations, right? For me, it's before it was the cheesecake. I love cheesecake with my coffee, and The first bite of cheesecake is always the best. It tastes really good. You know, you get that hit of dopamine rush in your brain. And, you know, except the second bite, it diminishes already. And by the time it comes to the third bite, you're like, oh, cheesecake is too much. Uh, so this inherent impermanence, nature in our existence uh, is very much a reality. The problem is we're resisting this reality. We don't want this reality to be changing. So, in Zen we have this saying, the coming and the going. We like the coming when it's positive for us. We don't like the going when it's not. It's positive things. We don't like the coming when it's negative for us. So I say, for example, we feel sadness. We don't like the coming of the feeling of sadness. We like the going of the feeling of sadness. So, it's our preferences in the coming and going of these impermanence nature that causes us a lot of distress. So on the external world of form, anything that you can perceive and touch and taste and hear and sense, all of these things come and go. So when we sit in meditation, we notice that in ourselves, in our internal experience, everything comes and goes. Our feelings are so impermanent. Sometimes it feels like certain feelings arise and it feels like they're there forever. But if you observe closely as the feeling arises and changes and go, you will notice that it's actually not around that long. Our thoughts as well, we have this train of thoughts that keeps going on. One thought follows another. It sounds like our whole day is filled with thoughts. And the truth is there's space between thoughts that you can actually catch in your meditation. And in those space, there's no thought. And so the thought comes and goes, and one thought arises and fall and disappears very, very quickly. Volition as well. You can find that motivation for us, survival motivation, so many different motivations, propels us to do the seeking, the chasing for pleasure, the seeking to avoid pain, all of these, I call it very basic momentum of being alive. It's constantly happening. And unless you've been meditating for a while, advanced meditators will notice this. There are space in your experience where no volition exists. And even volitions are changeable, are mutable. They come and they go. In personal consciousness, we all thought that this inherent felt sense of me that exists in us is always there. It's constant. The truth is, it comes and goes as well. But because the gap in between it is so small that most of us don't notice it. So this inherent impermanence that we see causes a lot of distress, especially the impermanence of life, which is death. And for most of us in our lives, we want to avoid the subject of death. Why? Because it seems so far away. We don't want to talk about it. I think one of the most probably problematic things to discuss with people is writing a will. It brings up all these ideas that you're no longer around, or if anyone who's into sales and has been selling life insurance, they know that it can cause a lot of discomfort for people. when you bring up this subject of, well, eventually you're not going to be around anymore. And so there is a theory in psychology called the terror management theory, which means that we are so afraid of this existential reality that we could be one day be no more, that we do all kinds of things to manage it. We create elaborate belief system that will still be around. We'll create meanings for our lives that will raise the kid, and they'll be an extension of our ego and our existence. We'll do something to contribute to life, leave a legacy, so that a part of ourselves lives on beyond us, our mere physical existence. So all of these maneuvering is to control what I call the impermanence nature of existence. Unfortunately, all of this maneuvering is kind of, I call it futile. Because what really exists and persists after you die is not inherently actually what you leave, is what people think you left. So if you were an author and you wrote a novel, right, and your idea of what that novel is supposed to be communicating or expressing is going to be interpreted and explained and analyzed and put under critical analysis by academics and critiques years after later. And what you've written is probably no more. It's not the original idea that you have. So everything is kind of skewed and changed. I believe that even the Buddha, the things he left and his teachings has evolved over 2,500 years. That has been since he was around. So a lot of his teachings are, kind of developed, but also at the same time, no longer just his original core teachings. It adapted, it changed, and it had mutated according to the times, to fit in with the times and the changing conditions of societies that Buddhism have come. But still, his original message remains with all these, continuing attachment and changing nature of everything. And his central teaching, revolutionary even in his time, and even in modern time, his central teachings still rings truth, that emptiness or non-self is inherently the experience of our reality. Well, what do you mean non-self? I think this one really gets a lot of people disagreeing with the Buddha. Well, I like romantic poets, so I'll share with you another poetry that this person actually agrees with the Buddha. Can death be sleep when life is but a dream, and scenes of bliss pass by as a phantom by? The transient nature of pleasures as a vision seem, and yet we think the greatest pain is but to die. How strange it is that man on earth should roam and lead a life of woe, but not forsake his rugged path, nor dare he view alone his future doom, which is but to awake. Isn't that so nice that you can put it so eloquently, what the Buddha taught? This is not somebody from India. His name is John Keats. He's another romantic poet in the 18th century, Victorian England. So Keats says our greatest fear is but to die. But the truth is, awake is our greatest fear. Why? Well, upon death, what happens? Everything we thought was a constant reality Everything we thought that we owned, that we can cling on to, falls away. Uh, so we cannot control reality as you know. We have this illusion of control while we're alive, that we can control and manipulate all kinds of different things in our reality. The truth is, upon death, all of that falls away, and everything that is who we are, that we thought we can control, is no more. And this causes a tremendous amount of fear. Suddenly, all of your attachments, your who you think you are, is no more. And some of it might fall away before death happens, but for someone who has sudden death, their experience is much more traumatic because it didn't slowly fall away. See, if we die of old age, we can see that slowly some of our faculties starts to fall away. And the things that we thought we are, a capable person, a physically healthy person, all of those things starts to fall away. And we start to embrace the new reality slowly. But if you have sudden death, all of those things suddenly happen in a flash. And everything that you thought you can cling to is no longer there. So the Buddha calls sudden death a very traumatic experience. It's not one to be desired. So what is this between the reality of emptiness and non-self? Well, because the Buddha sees the self as a process, as an internal, ever-shifting and changing process that we identify with, okay? That the non-self is a reality because this process is never constant, okay? So there is no inherent self-nature because it's always changing. There's nothing that you can grasp on, but you continuously try to grasp on moment by moment. What is that? Well, there's form. And when I say form, I mean the external form and the internal form of reality, the mental pictures, the mental experiences, the feelings, the thoughts, the volitions, and the personal consciousness, perceptions, everything that goes on internally, the Buddha calls the five aggregates. It's continuously in a state of flux. And when it's continuously in a state of flux, what we inherently do is that when one arises, we grab onto that. When the next one arises, we grab onto that. So we continuously grab on these five ever-changing elements inside ourselves, and we experience that as the self. So inherently, the Buddha says we have no self. The truth is we have no self. The self is this process that is forever shifting and changing and is non-permanent. So this process, I guess modern psychology is starting to see all of this as well. And this process is forever changing, whether you call it a shifting sensation, feelings, perceptions, and thoughts, and volitions, and consciousness, personal consciousness. And I can get into that further. Is that all of this shifting, changing focus process, we identify with it. And when we identify with it, we mistaken it for who we are. Except that this changing reality is so fragile that when we grab onto it and is mistaken for who we are, every time it's been challenged as impermanence, as not real, as something that can shift and change, we defend it. We resist for it to change. And what happens after that is anger. Anger is a form of defensive mechanism that we use to resist against the changes that happens in ourselves. So emptiness is actually the reality of all things. All things are inherently empty. And I can't really discuss the concept of emptiness because there's nothing there. The truth is, you have to experience it. When I got interviewed before and people asked me to discuss the concept of emptiness, and I thought, emptiness is basically saying there's nothing there. Discussion, there's nothing there to discuss about. Simple. An academic paper about it, which I think a lot of academians have done so. The truth is, it's an experience, it's an insight that you gain from the meditative practice. So I can discuss, the many virtues of a cheesecake. But the truth is, you're gonna have to take a bite of the cheesecake to know what a cheesecake tastes like. So the virtues of the many virtues of a cheesecake is not going to work for you unless you take a bite of the cheesecake. And when you do take a bite of the cheesecake, the many virtues of the cheesecake doesn't really matter. Just tastes good. You enjoy it, right? So this is why Zen emphasized so much on the experience itself, the meditative experience, to realize emptiness. Not to discuss about it, not to grasp onto the concept of what emptiness is, but to realize it. And realizing emptiness is realizing the non-self that the Buddha talks about. You can start to see some of these non-self, have insights into some of these non-self experience when you observe your own inner reality during your meditation, right? Is there anything during your meditation that is constant inside? Or does it always change? Yeah? We have a joke in Saskatchewan. You don't like the weather? Wait 5 minutes. So inside you, this five aggregates is constantly changing. Eh? You wait for a little bit, it changes. It doesn't, no matter how long we think anything lasts, it inevitably change. So the reality is, all of reality changes, and even our internal experiences changes, and the many factors that make up our external experiences are in a constant state of flux. They themselves do not have any inherent self nature. They themselves do not have any inherent reality, because they are never permanent. So the Buddha, upon realizing this non-self, and by the time that he had realized this experience, he already practiced meditation for 6 years full time, but he couldn't find a way to end suffering. He had went through the many meditative experiences. He went through the 4 jhanas and the 5 they call arupa jhanas, which is the higher forms of meditation experience. Went through a lot of blissful, peaceful experiences in meditation, but still suffering remains. So it wasn't until he realized the non-self nature of reality inside and the non-self nature of reality outside that he was able to open the door for the end of suffering. And when you practice Zen, in Rinzai Zen, to realize the non-self nature of reality is called Kensho. So Kensho is for that moment, a brief moment, very brief. It doesn't really happen to happen but for a very long time. But for that brief moment, all of the elements of what we call a self, the five aggregates, just falls away. It falls completely away. And suddenly you have this empty, open reality. I call it a clear sky. You can't, describe it any more than that. Opened up, and you realize that your whole life is about a dream. I was about 27 years old at that time when that happened. I've been observing my koan for probably off and on for 13 years. My koan is Who Am I? And believe me, I tried every way to kind of work this question. When I didn't have help from my teacher, I went to a psychoanalyst to help me discover what is a self. I need somebody to bounce ideas off and point out things to me. And so we kept looking for the unconscious motivations, and maybe that's a part of the self. And what I've noticed is everything that I put my finger on, it just didn't stick. Huh? It was constantly shifting. If I thought myself as a good person, in my observation of myself in everyday life, I'll do something that that doesn't really inherently incongruent with being a good person. If I thought myself as a bad person, well, I've done some pretty good things. I've done a lot of good things, so I can't be a bad person. If I thought myself as a student, a good learner, well, some days I'm actually not that into learning. So every tag, every identity, everything that I stuck onto myself, it just didn't stick. When you observe the nature of the forever constant changing reality, you realize that everything changes, and self-identity, identity view is very, very much the same. Huh? It doesn't stick for very long, except that we want it to stick. Okay. And even that, sometimes we don't stick labels onto ourselves. Other people trying to stick labels onto us, and we would, vehemently reject it if it's a bad label, or we would, kind of lovingly accept it if it's a good label. It must feel good. So if somebody calls me a jackass, I'll be like, no, I'm not a jackass. Well, I don't really fit the description of a jackass, but sometimes I act like one. And, when you realize that, you don't take it very personal when somebody calls you a jackass. Because behaviors are inherently changeable, and they're not something that is fixed. So also, at the point where just before I had my Kensho, my father passed away, so I witnessed his dying process, and it was very abrupt because he only had 3 months to prepare for his death, because he died of lung cancer, and when he found out, it was the last stage. And my father was very attached to life. He was very attached to everything. He loved his life. He was a good dancer. He was professionally doing very well. And he had a lot of good friends. He traveled the world. He really had a bigger than life ego. But when I saw him facing death, he started to get depression. He started to feel helpless. Matter of fact, before he died, he resisted dying because of the fact that he was very much attached to everything that was in his life. he wanted our funeral procession to drive past his 2 offices that that he had established, in his career, and drive past and do things to sort of honor his achievements in life. And the truth is, when I witnessed him dying, all of that, I realized, falls away. It's been almost 20 years since he passed away. And how many people remembers him? How many people remembers him for his achievements in passing? Not very many. so, so the truth is, it will happen to you too. No matter what your greatest achievement is. That's the reality. Don't get attached to it. Also, I had a little bit of an existential crisis because I realized, witnessing my father's death, that nothing that he has ever achieved, nothing that he has ever attached to, remains when he dies. And so I looked at it and I thought, what's going to happen to me? So I looked at my own life, and I was kind of entering a good phase in my career. I was establishing my own office. I had a couple of I had 3 staff, I had a partner, and my life was pretty good. And suddenly I thought, any moment now, it could be gone like that. Huh? And it doesn't have to be something that we think that's going to happen in the future. Any moment, it could be gone like that. Because the Buddha calls life as fleeting as the next breath that goes out and not come in. And for me, having a condition called asthma all my life, that's very much a reality. Okay, so I feel like I'm living with this executioner's blade just at my neck here with a condition of asthma, because you get an asthma attack and you get no medicine at that moment, it'll be done. That's how serious the condition is. So for me, it was very much a reality. I had an existential crisis after my father passed away. So this question of who am I starts to stick in my mind and constantly follow me around. So in the summer of 2004, about 8 months after my father passed away, I went camping with my friends. And I love camping. Every year I go camping. I was sitting on this rock, outside of a convenience store in the campsite. I call it a shack. And I was watching the sky and the forest. But in my mind, I was struggling with everything and that happened to my father. I was in grief, and I was, I would call it non-present. I was not there. So when a friend of mine came behind me and asked me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm sitting here, I'm thinking." He asked me, "What are you thinking?" And so I tell him, "I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about this, I'm worrying about that." And he looked at me, and he was very compassionately trying to help me to calm down. So he asked me, he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And he says, 100 years from now, everything that you think about, does it make any difference? Does it matter at all? And as soon as he asked that question, boom, it's like something just hit me. My mind just stopped, and everything just fell away. Just for a moment, everything just fell away. And there was this immense emptiness that opened up. And realizing and looking and seeing that emptiness, I, for the first time, experienced what the Buddha called the non-self, or what Western now call no ego. And suddenly it dawned to me at the same time with that realization, with that experience, that my whole life was a dream. It was a narrative that I made up in my head. And, all the people in it, all the characters in it was like a novel that I've written. And this drama script that had been going on all of my life had no inherent existence. And at that reality, I burst out laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. I basically laughed for 15 minutes, and I laughed until I started crying. And my friend said, "What the hell happened to you?" I couldn't tell him, because it's one of those things that you just can't tell. But it was the most incredible experience that I have ever experienced. And that day, after I finished laughing, I looked at the scenery around me, the sky and the trees and the forest that was in front of me was the most beautiful thing I've ever laid eyes on. The difference is that it's not that they weren't there before, that the forest and the trees and the sceneries weren't there before. The difference is I don't have any filters on anymore. And I was in complete presence, able to appreciate the reality without all of these filters of the mind. So this is what experience of the non-self is like. And in Rinzai Zen, we call it Kensho, seeing your nature, your true nature, for the first time. And I can go into, what Kensho is in another talk, but, Kensho is inherently seeing that Buddha nature that is always there, unchanging, always present, and is non-impermanent. Everything else in life is permanent except Buddha nature. Okay? And what is Buddha nature? Buddha nature is emptiness. What, if you're listening through the lens of the ego, this is very terrifying, by the way. Because the ego doesn't like things to be empty. The ego wants to fill up, reality with somethingness instead of nothingness. So and I want to make a clear differentiation between the non-self and the ego. Okay, the non-self is basically a definition for the ever-changing process that's inside of you, that's always happening. Okay, the process itself does not have any inherent self nature. We cling to it and identify with it to make a self out of it, but in reality, it doesn't have any inherent self nature. So that's called the non-self. You experience that all the time, every day, and you don't know it because you're so busy clinging onto the 5 changing aggregates and trying to make a self out of it. So the non-self is the nature of existence. Well, no ego, no ego is different. No ego is this. The ego is this reflexive mechanism. Okay, so is this reflexive mechanism that reflects back whatever you experience, whatever the 5 aggregates is doing, to a sensation as feeling, this kind of felt sense of me. Okay, this I am. So everything is reflected back to I am. So you have a feeling, it's my feeling. I am the feeling. If you have a thought or an experience, you reflect it back. It's my experience. It's mine, myself, and I. So this reflexive mechanism, okay, is the thought thinking about itself. Okay, it's not just the thought thinking about itself. It's this awareness of the separateness of you and other people. I know they have a different term for that in psychology, but you know, this ego is probably the fall guy in modern in current pop spirituality, and people keep wanting to experience this called ego death um, as the ultimate experience of spirituality. Well, let me tell you something. It's not fun. It's a terrible experience, and I wouldn't wish it on the worstest of my enemies. But the truth is, it's something to be. I would say, if you're really looking for true spirituality, you really have to go through this experience called ego death. It's very painful. Okay, it can be very challenging because it basically pulls a rug from underneath the house that you call reality that you built everything on. So after the experience of Kensho, at some point afterwards, the person who had practiced Zen, if they keep on practicing, they're going to experience some form of ego death. And this is where I say you really need a teacher. Because if you don't have a teacher to walk you through the experience and support you through the experience, and you don't have a Sangha or a teacher to support you through the experience, it can be pretty, I call it traumatic. Okay? And number of Western researchers have talked about this experience early on. Carl Jung written extensively about this experience. Another person, what's his name? He's an anthropologist. He wrote about this experience of ego death as well. So in Zen Buddhism, ego death is called the Great Death. Okay, why is it great? Because it is bigger than the physical death itself. Because the ego death will help transform a person to a new reality that is inherently the true reality of all experiences. Now, that propels a person into what you call normally called enlightenment. Okay, so what is this ego death experience? Well, it's the falling away of, I called, a lot of self-identity that is attached to this felt sense of self. This identification of oneself being separate from everybody. And the falling away of self, could be propelled by this Kensho experience. And the Kensho experience, basically, it's one moment that you experience this ego ceasing to be, I mean, it's one thing to experience the self as a ever-changing reality. It's another thing to experience the non-self where all of these ever-changing reality doesn't exist. Okay, so the inherent deep level of, I call it emptiness behind all manifestations. Okay, the totality of consciousness, which is inherently empty and without any separate self-nature. I'm starting to get into word salad, to be honest. So, and it's kind of hard to avoid word salad. The truth is, you have to experience this yourself. And when you do experience it, it's going to be a little bit disorienting. For me, it wasn't as disorienting because of the fact that up to that point, I had read a tremendous amount of literature in Eastern mysticism and Buddhist practice in many different traditions. about this experience. And I have spoken with my teacher about it too. So when it did happen, I recognized it right away what it is. And I have context for it. So as disorienting as it was for me, it was still I call it a positive gradual process. But if you don't have the context for it, ego death can be very, very disorienting. Okay. So suddenly everything you built your inherent reality on, it's pulled away. And hopefully that at that point you have a good teacher who can give you context and you have enough preparation to recognize what it is. But still, I would tell you, the more you attach to the ego or your self-identity created by all of this kind of bundle of different things that you kind of attach to yourself your whole life, whether it's your professional ego, or I am a good person, I am a bad person, I have these achievements, I am a student, I am a a patient person. No matter what you attach yourself, all of these labels upon experiencing can show an irreversible process starts to happen, is that all of these labels starts to fall away. And if you desperately try to cling onto it as it falls away, it's going to be pretty painful. Okay. Even when you don't cling onto it, it still falls away and it still is painful. But don't attach more pain on top of pain, which is definition of suffering. So one person asked me recently, how long does this process take? Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it? It takes us fast or as long as it takes, because everyone has different karmic, karmic conditioning. And everyone reacts differently to the process. Some people resist more and some people resist less. The more you resist, the longer it takes. The more you resist, the more painful it takes. Okay. So this is what essentially happens in Buddhism when it comes to experiencing the non-self nature and also experiencing the non-ego experience. Okay, so can their ego be completely eradicated? The answer is no. Why would you want to eradicate it? You need it to survive. Otherwise, you walk into the wall because you can't tell the difference between yourself and the wall. And I've never met a Zen teacher who walks into a wall. Okay. So you need the ego. Just the difference is you don't identify with it. That's the difference. Okay. You recognize which is your true Buddha self nature, the awakened nature in you. You recognize the Buddha nature that is universal, the emptiness nature of all things. So you recognize that and you experience that at the same time as experiencing all of the ego machination, So the ego still works. It's still fluctuating. It's still happening. The difference is you don't identify with it. Another thing is, does the five aggregates still works? The five aggregates still works. Even an arahat or a realized, a fully enlightened Buddha still has the five aggregates going on, because you if you don't feel, you're a rock. If you don't have any thoughts, well, I don't know. What's it like for a person who have no thoughts? Impossible, right? So many people, meditators, try to experience this experience of no thought and try to sustain it. Well, you'll sit and be a vegetable for how long it takes, but ultimately you're going to have to come out of that state, right? And thought starts to happen again. The difference is you don't cling to these kind of aggregates that continuously happen. It just happens. It rises, it falls, it rises, it falls. So I can tell you, I do have feelings. I'll get mad sometimes. I'll get irritated, not very often. But when it does happen, it's seen for what it is and it falls very quickly. The question is how long you want those five aggregates experience to last, right? And the more you cling on to them, the longer they last. Okay. I'm going to have time for questions and answer, and then dedication of the merits. Now, for anyone who wants to leave early, I'm going to dedicate the merits so you can leave, or you can stay for the question and answer period. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.